Why does the Morgan three-wheeler exist? I mean, really, because from the look of it, it only exists to garner as much attention as it possibly can, the same way a tube top or a Mohawk does. But there has to be more to it. So to find out why Morgan resurrected its three-wheeler, we're gonna take one out onto the road. As soon as we can figure out how to get into it. In the 1920s, cars were expensive. Motorcycles, not so much. So in Europe, cycle cars sort of grew organically and out of need. People wanted transportation, and they wanted fun transportation, but they didn't want to spend their life savings on a car. The original three-wheeler stuck in Morgan's lineup until 1952, and although it's back and it's updated with some modern niceties and amenities, it seems like it's a lot the same car that you got in the early 20th century. If you hadn't noticed, there's a giant V-twin motor sitting on top of the front axle line. Now, that motor comes from S&S, and they're the company that supplies Harley with its V-twin motors. That motor is air-cooled, which makes sense why it's sitting in front of the car, where it's gonna get the most air and stay cool. And the engine sends its power through a 5-speed manual transmission, which is donated from a Mazda Miata, which means it's very easy to shift, very light, and very fun to row through. But that transmission doesn't send its power through a drive shaft to a rear axle. Instead, it sends it through a bevel box that then goes through a belt that drives the single rear wheel that's on a rear swing arm, much like a motorcycle. So while there are things predictable about the Morgan three-wheeler, that it feels ancient, not built in 2013, and that it feels more like a motorcycle than a car, I could have never predicted how much fun it is to drive. There are two things I really love about this car. One, it's V-twin motor, because when you want to get on, there are gobs of torque. Gobs! My God, it just immediately flicks forward. But the V-twin is overshadowed by this car's handling. With the two wheels out front, the car is so easy to drive, and since I can see the wheels, I can just put it right into a corner and stick. Because I feel like I should be leaning down and turning my knee in, like I'm on a motorcycle, but it has all the amenities of a car, so I can balance my way through a corner much easier. And while you think maybe that the rear end would get a little bit fishy, it doesn't, it just sticks through. But it's strange, I'm starting to realize what I love most about this Morgan three-wheeler, and it's one of those things that I predicted, is that it feels ancient. And that's interesting, because that's why I think the Morgan three-wheeler still exists. In a world increasingly full of traction-controlled, launch-controlled, and frankly over-controlled vehicles, the Morgan three-wheeler is a refreshing breath of stale air. Its basic design might be a century old, but it's also a great reminder of how simple cars can be the most fun to drive. So its exterior design might only appeal to those who have seen Memphis Belle one too many times, but any enthusiast could get behind the wheel of this car and understand its appeal. And that is why the Morgan three-wheeler exists.